It all started on a calm Sunday morning. Just me, my fishing rod, and the peaceful water behind my house. I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and one of the main reasons I bought this property was the private lake that came with it. It's part of my deed, fully on my land, and I've fished there more times than I can count. So you can imagine my surprise when a woman from the HOA, who I'd later come to know as Karen, stormed over. Arms crossed, claiming I was violating community rules by fishing in my own backyard. At first, I thought she was joking, but then came the warning letter. Then the fine. They said I was disturbing the peace, using community property without permission, though the lake is clearly on my parcel. Things escalated fast. Suddenly, I was dealing with threats of legal action, daily emails, and even a visit from their so-called compliance officer. And all this just because I dared to cast a line into water I legally own. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of backing down, I did some digging. I read every line of my property deed, went through the HOA bylaws, and even brought in a legal expert. What I found made my jaw drop and gave me the perfect ammunition to fight back. Because, as it turns out, they were in the wrong. Very wrong. I didn't just stop at proving my right to fish. I turned the tables and uncovered violations the HOA had been making for years, ones that ended up costing them a lot more than they ever expected. Let's just say that $50 fine they tried to stick me with. It turned into a $10,000 wake-up call for the entire board. But before, tell you exactly how I pulled it off and brought Karen and the HOA to their knees. You need to see what they did next, because it wasn't just about fishing anymore. It became something much bigger. And it's the twist you won't see coming to really understand how crazy things got. You have to know a bit more about this HOA and Karen in particular. She wasn't just a board member. She was the board, or at least acted like it. Always walking around with her clipboard, snapping photos of people's lawns, sending out warning letters if your garbage can sat out 5 minutes too long. Most of us in the neighborhood just kept our heads down to avoid the hassle, but I never expected she'd come after me over something so petty, especially fishing on a lake. That's clearly spelled out in my property deed. Now, this wasn't just any HOA. They prided themselves on keeping the community uniform and orderly. But to me, it felt more like they were looking for problems that didn't exist. I've lived here longer than most of the current board members. The lake in my backyard was part of the original property line, and when I bought the place, it came with full rights to use it however I wanted, as long as I wasn't dumping chemicals or disturbing wildlife, which I never have. I've always taken care of the land. Still, that didn't stop Karen. After the warning, she claimed the lake was shared HOA property, even though the county records showed otherwise. When I pushed back, she escalated. She sent official-looking letters with HOA letterhead, citing made-up rules that didn't even exist in the bylaws. She even tried to say I needed permission to install a fishing bench by the shore. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a lake. It was about control. And I wasn't the only one being targeted. I started talking to neighbors, and sure enough, a pattern began to form. Karen had fined people for hanging holiday lights a day early, for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list, even for having kids' bikes left out on driveways. But no one had challenged her until now, and once I started peeling back the layers, what I found buried in the HOA's records completely changed the game. But before I could make my move, Karen pulled something that made it personal. It all came to a head the day I got a certified letter in the mail. Not an email, not a note on the Dora Folin legal-looking packet from the HOA, signed by Karen herself. According to them, I was now being fined $500 for unauthorized use of common property. And if I didn't comply within 10 days, they'd put a lien on my home. A lien for fishing on my own lake. That was the moment it stopped being ridiculous and became serious. I could have just paid it to make it go away, like so many others had done before me. But that's exactly what they were counting on. I kept digging. I started looking into how HOA funds were being used, and what I found was shocking. There were payments for services that didn't exist, landscapers no one had seen, and maintenance charges that didn't match what was actually being done. It looked like someone was funneling money into things that didn't quite add up. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't letting up. She started patrolling near my property, taking photos from the sidewalk, and even bringing other board members with her like backup. It was starting to feel less like an HOA and more like surveillance. One of my neighbors, a quiet retired guy named Jim, pulled me aside and told me they fined him last year for putting a bird feeder in his front yard. He tried to appeal it, but mysteriously got denied before he even had a hearing. The more people I talked to, the clearer it became this wasn't just one overzealous board member. The entire HOA board was in on something, and Karen was at the center. Some neighbors wanted to help, but they were scared of retaliation. One woman told me her fees mysteriously doubled after she questioned a violation notice. Another said Karen threatened to suspend her community pool access over a flower bed. It felt like everyone was under some kind of quiet pressure to just go along with it. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Because I had found something in the HOA's annual budget report that didn't just break their rules, it broke actual laws. I stared at the HOA's annual budget report for hours that night, going line by line. And then it jumped out at me, something so out of place it felt like a punch to the gut. There was a $10,000 line item labeled Landscape Restoration, Private Shoreline. That's right, private shoreline. It matched my property. The HOA had spent thousands of dollars maintaining my land without ever asking my aunt. Now they were trying to claim it as theirs. That was their smoking gun. They'd use community funds on something they didn't own, then fined me for using it. I printed every document I could find: property maps, bylaws, old meeting minutes, payment logs. I even pulled county tax records that showed I paid full property tax on the lake area. There was no gray area. The lake was mine. And now I had proof the HOA had not only overstepped, but had potentially misused homeowners' money in the process. The pressure started building fast. Karen showed up at my door again, this time with 2 other board members. She said they were conducting an inspection. I told them they were trespassing and shut the door. That same week, I started getting strange emails from anonymous accounts accusing me of stirring up trouble. My mailbox was tampered with. Someone left a note on my truck windshield that just said, "Watch it." But I wasn't backing down. I met with an attorney, showed him everything, and he just shook his head. "This could get ugly," he said, "but you've got them." He helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA, along with a notice of potential legal action for mismanagement of funds and harassment. Then came the turning point. I requested a slot to speak at the next HOA meeting. Karen tried to deny it, but by law, they couldn't block me. The night of the meeting, the room was packed, more neighbors than I'd ever seen at one of these things. Everyone had heard the rumors. Everyone wanted answers. I stepped up to the mic, heart pounding, holding a thick folder of documents. Karen sat across the room, arms crossed, face stone cold. And that's when I dropped the first bomb. The room went dead silent as I held up the first document, a copy of my deed showing clear property boundaries with the lake fully within my lot. I could see people leaning in, whispering. Karen didn't say a word, but her grip on the chair tightened. Then I showed the county tax records, proving I paid taxes on the lake area every single year. That alone should have been enough to end it, but I wasn't done. I turned the page and presented the budget report with the $10,000 shoreline restoration line. pointing straight to the misuse of HOA funds. That's when the murmurs started to grow louder. A few board members exchanged looks. One of them, a guy named Steve, who always seemed a bit unsure, finally spoke up. "Wait, we approved funds for that? I thought it was for the community entrance landscaping." Karen shot him a glare, but the damage was already done. The cracks were forming, and the room could feel it. Then, just as I was about to bring up the harassment and threats I'd received, a hand went up from the back of the room. It was Mrs. Carter, one of the oldest residents on the block. She stood up slowly and said, "That shoreline work. It wasn't the only project that didn't get board-wide approval. My roof repair last year, I was told the HOA would cover half. They never paid me a dime. Said I missed a deadline that wasn't even in the rules." Now people were talking over each other. More stories started pouring out: mysterious fees, denied requests, shady denials. And that's when Steve dropped the real bombshell. I never saw the final financial reports. Karen's been handling them privately for months. The room froze. Karen stood up, saying something about procedure, but no one was listening. Anymore, it wasn't just about me, or the lake, or fishing anymore. This had exposed something way deeper, possibly fraud, and definitely abuse of power. And right when I thought things couldn't get more intense, one neighbor shouted, "Call 4